understand why they need to vote for you.
Well, I mean, I think the most obvious one that occurred to me before I entered the race was the Travis County Sheriff's Office. The sheriff was taking a position. This led to the SB4 and the passage of that law. The sheriff, uh, the, the local officials have no legal authority to make immigration law, enforce immigration law, or obstruct immigration law. And what the sheriff was doing was saying she was not going to cooperate with federal officials with their detainer requests. And that led to the state legislation in the SB4 that was mandating cooperation. In my opinion, the Travis County Sheriff was interjecting herself to promote her own personal political views. She opposes the immigration law as it is, and she was using her public office to serve her personal interests, not the public interest. In the case of my race, as it turns out, it appears that my opponent has actually promised to use the office to promote her own personal political partisan interests, where I have committed myself to political neutrality. In my opinion, this is a choice for voters between a Republican lawyer who is more experienced and more qualified versus a Democrat lawyer who is less experienced, less qualified. This is a choice between a lawyer who has committed is committed to political neutrality and the Democrat candidate who has promised to use the office for own personal political interest. And I can discuss that more if you want in detail. And then this is a choice between a lawyer who is committed to impartiality and non-discrimination versus a Democrat candidate who uh, has promised to show favoritism and discriminate based on class status.
Sure. And just to drive the point home, and then I'll let everybody else jump in here. I won't monopolize the conversation. But what, I guess, if you could give us an idea of what type of cases would come before the JP court and why your neutrality, political neutrality toward those cases would be beneficial to somebody who would come before you as a judge.
Well, I mean, political neutrality is really kind of a subset of impartiality in general. And to me, if you ask me what is the most important quality of a judge, there are important skills, but I think in terms of the quality, I think must be impartiality. If there is any hint of bias, that completely will undermine public trust and confidence in that judge and in that court. And the judiciary is one of the three branches of our government, and it serves as a check and balance on the other two. So if that branch becomes corrupt, I think the trust in the other branches would unravel as well. So I think that it's absolutely essential that our judges remain impartial and avoid not only being impartial, but anything that will appear to show partiality. I'm sorry, what
the types of cases.
Oh, types of cases. The jurisdiction of the justice of peace is pretty broad. I mean, it covers, it has a civil jurisdiction and criminal jurisdiction. For criminal cases, the jurisdiction is limited to Class C misdemeanors. Typically, fines are up to $500, but there can be no confinement or incarceration as punishment. Those are outside the jurisdiction of the court. Civil jurisdiction would include matters up to $10,000 in value. Those types of disputes, they can include landlord-tenant disputes. If there could be an eviction proceedings, dispute over basically possession of the property. The justice of peace cannot decide issues of title or possession. If the tenant is being mistreated and utilities have been shut off, they can go to the justice of peace to have restoration of those services. There are a variety of other duties. There's animal protection. If there is an allegation of animal cruelty, it is the justice of peace that makes a determination whether or not there has been cruelty. And the justice of peace is devoted to protecting the animal's welfare. They don't decide the criminal case against the individual. It's just for animal protection.
So there's a lot of areas, but I guess what I'm hearing is traffic tickets and apartment disputes, which I know there's a lot of those in the city of Austin in Travis County. So that is why these positions are so important. And I think it would behoove people to to pay attention to who they're voting for.
And this is it's kind of a different type of office because it's kind of a hybrid. Because on the one hand, it's a county office, it's a county official. The budget is set by the county commission, and but otherwise, the Justice of the Peace controls the office and manages the office. So it's an office that requires administrative skills or executive type skills. But first and foremost, I think should be considered a judicial office. And a lot of people don't really understand that as a judicial office, it is different than an executive or political type office, a legislative office that requires the political neutrality that we talked about.
Would you tell our guests, excuse me, our audience, where this particular precinct is located?
Sure. Well, in Travis County, there are 5 precincts, and each precinct has 1 justice of the peace. That was determined by the Travis County Commissioners Court pursuant to the Texas Constitution. And right now, they all serve 4-year terms, and they're all up for election at the same time. I'm running for Justice of the Peace Precinct 3, and that is really the southwest quadrant, somewhat. If you look at the river, is to the north, to the southern border, and 35 to the east, to the western border.
Okay.
It's kind of a rough outline.
Least I get a general idea of where the office is located.
Yeah, and only my office, or I'm the only Republican candidate running for Justice of Peace other than Precinct 2. The other 3 offices for incumbents are unchanged by a Republican.
Wow. You weren't lying about that lack of choice.
Yes. Well, if your opponent is anything like the sheriff, because the sheriff said there's a new sheriff in town.
Well, I mean, to her credit, after the passage of SB4, as far as I know, she's been compliant. But that is just her behavior exemplified what I was describing. And there are others. I mean, think about it. Travis County is suing the state of Texas over SB4. And so, in effect, the taxpayers are paying for a lawsuit against themselves as residents of the state.
Exactly.
So,
when it's a law, if we have to follow it, let them know.
Well, and it's an interesting case because it was kind of roles were reversed when before the election and the new administration took office. President Obama went to court to challenge Arizona. That had passed legislation to basically enforce federal law, but the federal government wasn't enforcing. And they got a decision from the Supreme Court saying there's complete federal preemption of this area of the law. The states have no authority to act, and even if the actions that they're proposing is to enforce federal law, if the federal government is choosing not to enforce it, you can't do anything inconsistent with that. And now, with the change in administration, where we have an administration that is intent on enforcing the law, they're claiming we don't have to cooperate. So it's kind of a double standard, at least sometimes funny.
Gary, you have something to say.
Well, I'm the Republican executive director, and I love going on Fox News and talking about Syria and immigration and all these things. And those are, in most cases, really insoluble problems that the president and the Congress have to deal with. And that's what I'm used to doing. I'm used to arguing and being a partisan. But I think it's worthwhile to point out here that you're not working on Syrian refugees. You're not even working on immigration issues. You told me a story that was interesting. You said that you're making animal welfare one of the main 4 parts of your campaign. You mentioned that online, and some Democrats said, "Oh, don't be fooled by this. He's a Republican, and Republicans like to hurt animals and all that." And I think that you're going to be successful in this race when you convince Democrats that what you're about is just good justice and fairness and really a lot of things that Democrats and Republicans tend to agree on. So let me ask you about that animal welfare plank that you're running on. I'm convinced that you're very sincere about it. And what is it that you think needs to be reformed or changed about the way and is this a small part of what JPs do, or is it really something where there are cases coming through every day?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a subject I have a personal interest in because of my love of dogs. I have a history, as long as I've been an adult, of rescuing dogs from animal shelters and just enjoying their love and affection and loyalty as we recognize them as our best friends. And it's something that seems to me that um, really shouldn't be a divisive issue. Now, I've found that some people have questioned my characterization of the issue, and I will make it perfectly clear, and I've tried to make this clear when I talk about it, that I'm talking about animal welfare, and I'm not talking about animal rights, and there's a distinction between the two. I'm not equating animal welfare with human rights. And so sometimes the words that we use get a little bit confusing, but there is a distinction there. But animal welfare is not just about protecting the animals, it's also about human welfare, because we discussed in the past about a story that came out last month, how there is a correlation, or there can be a correlation between people who harm animals, use animals, and then go on to harm humans. And it may be a harbinger of bad things that may be coming from an individual if there's evidence that they have harmed an animal or intend to do harm. And there's a difference between somebody that does something impulsively, but they're really looking at a connection between those who engage in premeditated behavior. And in fact, in two cases that they've investigated, people who were planning terrorist activities, they had a history of animal abuse.
Wow.
So it's a big issue, even beyond the cats and dogs that we might see in the neighborhood. I know every night I feed 5 cats. There's a cat living inside my house, and they get the same food that the cat on the inside of the house gets. But I grew up with feral cats basically as my pets.
And I don't necessarily think that animal cruelty is a prevalent or predominant problem in Precinct 3, let alone Travis County. But in some sense, I don't really know, because I think there's a lot of people are reluctant to report it. They see a family member or somebody they know behaving badly towards an animal, they may just dismiss it and not report it. They may not even know what the rules are as far as proper treatment of the animal, the humane treatment that is required by law. We have laws, state laws, we have city laws, and there is a city department that's devoted to this. And what I have found is that there's a greater interest in protecting the animals and helping animal owners to properly treat the animal, more so than punishing them for perhaps not truly following what the law requires. If somebody has their dog tethered or chained, they will help them with fencing so that they don't need to have them tethered or chained. If a dog needs shelter, they'll provide a dog house for the dog. But they go out and they keep track. And what I'd like to do is, again, use my campaign to raise awareness of what I think is an important issue, important to me, and I believe probably to the community as a whole.
Well, that is an awesome point you want to run on because of all the cat lovers and owners that we have in this city.
Well, it's funny, as I go door to door walking, it's really interesting how in some neighborhoods it is very obvious it's a dog neighborhood, and in others there are cats all over the place. But it's not the same place for both.
Part of the big sort. I guess people are saying, I'm going to move to a cat. That's what I'm going to do. Well, you mentioned the politicization and then I asked you about the animals. You've got a couple of other things that are on your short list of issues with regard to ethics and all of that. I know that you have made a policy of not starting off your campaign by criticizing this young woman who's running and has gotten the nomination. And I don't expect you to say anything negative about her, but why don't you tell us what's different about you? What is it that makes you a better candidate, no matter what your political views are?
Well, I have been addressing qualifications, and when I talk about qualifications, I talk about legal skills or professional legal skills, plus integrity and temperament. And I think if you look at the evidence about our qualifications, that by any objective measure, I'm the best qualified candidate. And I can go through each of really those three categories and address those, but they're really interrelated. But if you just look at legal experience, by virtue of my age, I have about 3 times the experience that she has. And it's not just the length of experience, but the breadth and the depth of experience that I think makes me more suitable to serve in this office. She, as far as I can tell from what I've read about her, she has served primarily in the office that she currently holds. She's working for the government office at the University of Texas, where she assists students. So she has served in an advocacy role for students, and she primarily advises them and helps them with those fairly minor legal matters. And I give her all the credit for doing what she does, and I'm sure she does it well. But my experience has been not only in the justice court, representing clients or representing myself. It's been I've represented I've handled cases in county court, state court, and federal court. I successfully assisted a Social Security client in appeal in federal court concluded last year, and that's very difficult to do. Very few of those cases are appealed in federal court, and we were successful in doing that. And not only have I represented individuals at the trial level, but also appellate level in these legal cases. So I have military experience that she doesn't have, and in the military I had criminal law experience. And even though she's representing students with criminal matters, Class C misdemeanors, I have served not only as a defense counsel, but also as a prosecutor. Because that was one of the unique aspects of being a military lawyer. I was commissioned while I was in law school. So when I left law school, graduated, passed the bar exam, and went on active duty, I had a certain seniority by virtue of being commissioned lawyers in law school that other new Navy lawyers didn't have. And so when my initial assignment was investigations division at the Office of the Judge Advocate General near Washington, where headquarters is actually in Alexandria. And I was given a security clearance, and I was responsible for reviewing classified investigations and deciding what information could be withheld from a release to the public or released to individuals to protect classified information.
Sure.
I did that for about a year, and then I was sent to the Naval Legal Service Office Detachment in Orlando, and that's where my seniority helped because at the time the officer in charge billet was going to be gapped, and the officer in charge who was present when I arrived detached from the office, and the new officer in charge hadn't yet arrived. So as a senior lieutenant, I was the acting officer in charge. So I was responsible for the office for a period of time. And the office consists of 2 other attorneys, 2 enlisted personnel, and 2 civilians. And then when the new officer in charge arrived, I was made the senior defense counsel, even though I had never litigated anything. I became the senior defense counsel, and so I served in that role, and when they recognized how skillful I was, they made me the prosecutor.
So what I'm hearing from you is the same way President Reagan told Walter Mondale, is that he will not, for political purposes, exploit your candidates, your opponents using that experience. Now, my next question for you is, do you think President Trump would have revoked your security clearance?
You know, frankly, I would have approved revocation of my security clearance as long as it was not necessary for the performance of my duties.
Well, we were talking a little bit before the show here about how you've made a pledge not to receive any any sort of campaign funds or donations from law firms or other attorneys who may fall under your purview jurisdiction as a JP, as a justice of the peace. So does that include? So first of all, I think it's very noble because I mean it takes a great leap of faith to do that. But I wish more candidates in a position to do that because, as we were saying, it does create sorts of conflicts of interest. So first of all, can you elaborate on that? And then the second question is that apply to all lawyers and law firms or just the ones that might come before you as a judge?
Well, my statement on my website is that I am not accepting contributions, money from lawyers who intend or expect to practice in Justice of the Peace Precinct 3 court. To me, it presents a classic conflict of interest. As a matter of law, it's not unlawful for my opponent to take money from lawyers and law firms, but I just choose to abide by a higher ethical standard. And my rationale for that is just personally, and I don't know whether other people think the same way I do about this or not, but when somebody gives me something, I just instinctively have an impulse to reciprocate. Anything of value, I just have that human impulse.
Politeness is nothing else.
Exactly. And even if I didn't have an impulse, other people might think I did. So there would be an appearance issue.
Oh, we want you to.
Well, yeah. So, to me, I think it is really appropriate to avoid that situation by just not taking the money in the first place. And, and of course you could say, well, there is no conflict that arises unless the person actually appears. But in that case, you're still telling voters that you're taking this money from attorneys and firms that may handle cases in your court. And if they show up, then you may recuse yourself as the judge in that case.
And it's pretty legally required.
No, it would probably be within the judge's discretion, and that which could be appealed. But she might, the judge in question might decide that, there's an appearance issue, or there's an actual conflict, and I'm going to recuse myself, and then there's going to have to be somebody else substituted for the justice of the peace in that precinct. And my view is, why are you seeking an office that you may be having to excuse yourself from? If you don't expect, you may be creating various situations that can preclude you from doing it effectively.
I think to keep the trust of the voters, you often have to step aside so there's no appearance. And that's too bad in a way. I wish that Americans could step forward and say, I'm a defense contractor and I know a lot about it, so I want to be a government employee because I'm an expert in this. And people wouldn't say, you'd be dishonest. So I guess if your opponent said, I'll recuse myself if I come up in court with any of my donors, or she could say, it doesn't matter, I don't need to recuse myself because I'm going to treat them completely impartially and they will not get any advantage whatsoever from giving me money. I don't think that's what she said.
No, and the problem though is that that's the dilemma, because if you find against that party, the party that they represent, then there may be a question, were you going the opposite direction just to avoid the appearance or to deny the appearance or the actual conflict? So somebody in that scenario is going to have a complaint.
But she made a public statement that in fact she would move them to the front of the line.
Yeah, in the context in which she said it, I think what made it even worse, because what she did was she held a fundraiser that was devoted to attorneys, lawyers. It was held at a law firm office, and she made remarks where she said, this is a good time to invest in my campaign, and if you appear in my court, you will get to go to the front of the line. So there was no direct quid pro quo, but you could certainly, I just instinctively saw that as just a very bad judgment to say something like that.
Absolutely. It has nothing to do with political views. It's just common sense, and it's really sort of if it's an indication of how that person's mind works, I think it's a very troubling thing that someone says.
And to compound it, the only reason I discovered it was because she posted the video on her website. So it appears that she didn't even recognize how it would appear.
No shame, I think, is the expression that comes up. She didn't even think that it was a problem.
And it's still there.
That's, I mean, you're right, no shame, but, you know, I am an attorney, newly licensed fairly, so I'm not an expert in this, but I seem to remember something in the rules of judicial conduct saying that it's probably not the best ethical position to make as a judge. So,
And she, I'm sorry, the after that, those remarks, after that event, if you look at her campaign finance statement, you see the contributions that came from the people that participated.
They took her seriously.
Exactly.
She made them an offer, and they took it up.
Now, whether they would have contributed otherwise, nobody would know. But it is, again, I think it's the you know, people say a person's character can be judged by what they do when no one is watching, and here this is what she's doing when people are watching. So what is she going to do when people aren't
If I
watching?
can keep asking some questions about that, I assume that in a JP court, you don't often have clients that come with 50 guys with briefcases from New York City or something. You have pro se clients coming just trying to work out a problem that they had with the JP, and so it is pretty amazing to me that this is a person running for this office who's pretty much saying, if you've got money and you've got a lawyer, you'll be better off with me.
And it's ethically a problem because of the reason why she said she would give them priority. The reason why she said she would give them priority was because their time was more valuable. And so this is another instance where she's using her official capacity to benefit somebody's private interest. I mean, she's saying so. And so that's another reason why I think that behavior is questionable ethics. So I think that, first of all, I would dispute that the lawyer's time is more valuable. If they're there, they're representing a client, they're probably getting paid for their time.
They're getting paid to wait.
Yeah. I mean, somebody that's there might be taking time off of work, away from work, with their family, and to be told that their time is not as valuable as the attorney's time, I think is a slap in the face.
Well, you're absolutely right. So my thing is that I really wish that every judge and attorney thought like you do when it comes to ethics, especially closing that door to any kind of quid pro quo. Don't even allow it to be open. You know, I think that if every judge, you know, really stood on their ethical morals, our country wouldn't even be in the condition that it's in. Everybody owes somebody something.
Well, I mean, and we're talking about it in the context of this race, but it just seems to me that we have a problem with ethics, you know, throughout the government. I mean, last week we had this damning report from the grand jury about the Charles County Tax Assessor Collector's Office.
He was a JP. He was a JP recently, and so real corruption.
Yeah, and you know, I've had people. You know, one thing I've discovered as a candidate is that you know, you're going to take off slings and arrows from people from the opposing party, and I've had people say that because I'm a Republican, I'm poisonous and evil, and that because I'm a Republican, I'm a member of a party that President Trump is a party of, and because I'm of the same party, I support corruption, and you know, it's. I think it's a rather risky thing to say that or make somebody guilty by their association and party affiliation, because quite honestly, corruption is not limited to one party. It is present in both parties, and if I'm going to be condemned as being corrupt because others in my party are corrupt, then the same is going to be true of Democrats and any Democrat.
Yeah, we don't want to head down that road. That guilt by association thing that you learned about in law school, right?
But the thing is that they can say whatever they want. they're entitled to their own personal opinion. But in the end, when it's nighttime, you're able to lay your head on your pillow for sleep in peace.
And you know, and I think I'm focusing on, I think, what I hope are the majority of voters in Precinct 3 that are reasonable and looking for areas of common interest rather than ways that we can divide ourselves for. And I mean, there are clearly we're all Americans. We're Texans. We should be able to focus on the things that we agree on and have a civil discussion and competition of ideas on those that we don't. And I don't like the fact that some people are trying to fault me for talking about the things that unite us and can unite us, as though it's some type of effort on my part to manipulate votes. And you know, if there are people that are trying to put a wedge between me and voters and other candidates and voters, again, it's purely for partisan political interest.
And it might work. That's worked in other races. You know, it is guilt by association. And if you can make voters uh, dwell on national issues and just stop electing so many Republicans locally, then that would be better for the Democratic Party. And I don't blame them. It's the political strategy that they're following is to try to tar Republicans with whatever some Republicans done. There's a veterans treatment court that is an issue in this race. I don't know anything about it. Do you guys know anything about it?
I'm not sure.
Well, you know, and honestly, I really didn't know anything about it until I entered the race. I got a questionnaire from a veterans group and asking me questions about whether I support the veterans court or not. And I did a little bit of studying on it, and I discovered that in 2009, the legislature passed legislation that authorized counties to create a veterans, it's actually called a Veterans Treatment Court. And it is for the purpose of, it's a pretrial disposition for veterans who are accused of offenses that have a mental health impairment. And it could be something like a traumatic brain injury or PTSD. And, you know, we may presume that those impairments influence their conduct. And this court provides an opportunity to afford them to participate in a treatment and recovery program instead of being prosecuted and have this record of an offense. And I've never practiced in the Veterans Court, but I took the opportunity to visit it during one of the sessions, and I was really impressed with it. It certainly is a different type of proceeding. It's very informal, but it's kind of motivational. The judge is motivational, and the judge can encourage them to participate and reward them for participating. And also, there's the leverage that he has or she has to take away those rewards or to you know, remove the person from the program if they don't comply. And I think, you know, these courts are specifically for veterans, but I think based on their success, if they are successful, continue to be successful, that the same thing might be applied for others with the same impairments who may not be there.
Well, that's a good point. I was actually thinking that because, you know, although we owe veterans a lot, they are not the only ones that suffer mental issues, PTSD. And I know the legislature's been looking at issues like that over the last few sessions. How should courts, law enforcement, et cetera, deal with people who may not understand exactly why they're in front of a judge.
And not every county has one. So, you know, this is something Travis County, I think, adopted it the year after it was authorized. But I think there are opportunities for even some counties that don't have it to enter into cooperative arrangements with Travis County or the other counties that have it.
And really briefly, how does that work with the JP's office? Does the JP say, "Oh, you're a veteran, I'm going to refer you to this other person"?
Well, ideally, the prosecutor's office will recognize the person is eligible for such a program, and if the person has representation, that they should be identified and encouraged to participate before they reach the JP. But I think my awareness of its availability is appropriate because there's always a possibility somebody may come in unrepresented, and the prosecutor may not have been alert to their veteran status. One thing I'm going to want to do is make certain that I identify the veterans that come before me.
And in your opinion, Mr. Harry, is the program working quite well, or are there any changes you'd like to see?
An actual veterans court?
Yes.
As far as I can tell, it's working. It seems to be working well. I'm not familiar enough with the actual outcomes to know, but just based on what I've observed and what I have read about it, people seem to be pretty enthusiastic.
So it's something you'd like to maintain?
Sure. I fully support it.
I think it's great that Texas and Travis County have veterans. Is this something that maybe Governor Perry may have done?
It was 2009, but it was. I suspect it was probably a bipartisan effort. So probably the members of both parties probably deserve some credit. But that's again something that we can agree on and come together, and we can be confident that if government can do something that actually produces good results, we can get behind that. But we shouldn't be afraid of identifying those areas where government fails and find other solutions.
I just think it's funny that people would come after you for being disingenuous about that, especially for that issue. I want to go back to the corruption we were talking about a little bit, because in my mind, I think that very succinctly shows a lot of the impartiality that we're talking about that we see in the JP system. And I know that you aren't running for legislative office, but would you like to see a law passed that would kind of mirror some of the positions you're taking in your campaign? If a legislator proposed a bill, would you be willing to go testify in favor of that bill, saying judges should generally not accept campaign funds from people they expect to see? Or do you think it should be more of a case-by-case basis?
Well, I'd probably need to see the legislation to be able to state one way or the other definitively, but my thought is I'm not necessarily in favor of trying to put everything in the law. I mean, I think we should because if you start prescribing the good behavior, then when people are ordinarily doing good, you're really depriving them of the sense that they are doing something good on their own initiative rather than because it's required. And as long as we subject people to public scrutiny of elections, then let the people decide whether they think one standard is sufficient or not. And that's what I'm trying to do in this race. Is that, as far as the campaign contribution, she's not going to but again, I think that it's just a matter of do we want a candidate who's going to abide by a higher ethical standard because it's the right thing to do, or someone who is committed to doing the minimum of the law.
Well, that has to do with
I can't get inside her head, so
it's okay. Her action is speaking out of her mouth.
Well, but then I guess the reason why it is a problem is maybe because there aren't a lot of people like you running on those principles, right? Because you would assume that voters would choose somebody, regardless of what party they're running under, who at least pledge to abide by those principles. Right?
That's assuming that they have studied the situation enough to know, and I know in this line of work and really being fascinated by politics, I've gone into a polling booth and realized that I wouldn't recognize the candidate, don't know any of the positions, and so I think that Martin Harry is going to win this office if a lot of people go out and talk to their neighbors about they've met him, they saw this show, they know something about it, and they think that they need to vote for him. And it's way down the ballot.
And he loves pets.
That's the biggest challenge is getting known in the precinct because I'm not I haven't run before, I haven't held on any other office, but fortunately for me, neither has my opponent. And so we have the same challenge there. So I'm devoting myself to raising hopefully public awareness of who I am, the office itself. I quickly discovered that my qualifications weren't as meaningful to other people who didn't know what the office involved. So I'm trying to impress upon people that this is a judicial office where ethics do certainly matter. And there are subjects that we can't really talk about because we are judicial candidates, but ethics is something that we don't talk about enough. So I'm hopefully using this campaign to serve a public purpose beyond just getting myself elected, so that whatever the outcome is, I would feel so I've achieved something in the process. And if I can help the party, I appreciate really the fact that Governor Abbott is such a strong candidate at the top of the ticket, and he sets a very good example, I think, for the rest of us. And if we can just get people who do actually come out to vote to go all the way down the ballot and find my name, then I think there's a very realistic chance of succeeding.
And we need some of those people who are going to vote against Governor Abbott to think about the fact that you are the best candidate for the common man here in Travis County. I think I said common man because I was born in the 1950s. I mean regular people of either gender. Basically, I mean. And seriously, I think that there are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that should really be considering your candidacy very, very carefully and thinking that maybe you're the right person for this job, regardless of who you voted for in 1984.
Yeah, and if I can, I'd like to discuss the relating back to the political neutrality and using the office for political purpose. I mentioned that, but I didn't really explain it. My opponent has expressed opposition to charter schools. She has a personal political dislike for those institutions. Now, she hasn't really explained it, at least I haven't heard the explanation. But for whatever reason, it seems that she distinguishes between charter schools and ISDs, referring to ISDs as public schools, but when in fact charter schools are public schools. But in any event, I think she's trying to pander to a particular interest group, an education lobby, and thinking that she's going to favor ISDs and not doing charter schools. But so on the one hand, and there's nothing wrong with her expressing opposition to charter school. As far as that goes, that's her First Amendment right to express her political opinion. The problem arises when she goes from that position and then promises that she is going to deny a lawful remedy to truant students that involves charter schools. So she is going to refuse to even consider, but regardless of what the evidence shows, regardless of what the facts are showing, if it's in the best interest of the child, she's going to subordinate the interests of that child to her own personal political interests. And what we can have in that scenario, or in anyone like it, is somebody appearing in Precinct 2, or Precinct 3, I'm sorry, treated differently than someone that shows up in Precinct 2, just because of who the judge is. And that is exactly the opposite of the rule of law. That is the rule of merit.
She got some trouble when it comes to a parent and their kids.
Well, it's just very unfair and in the height of partiality.
And it's ironic because the University of Texas that she works for runs a charter school operation that helps some very high-risk students. And charter schools, as many of them are open enrollment schools, just like ISDs. And there are some charter schools that actually have a higher percentage of high-risk students than ISDs. So again, this issue isn't really a matter of whether you're for or against charter schools, but there should be no tolerance for a public official subordinating the public interests, a matter that comes before them, to their own personal policy interests.
You did mention there that it was your opponent's First Amendment right to espouse these views, and it reminded me of the U.S. Constitution, which I'm a big fan. And I was reading your website a few days ago in preparation, and one of the first things you say on your website is that you are going to pledge to uphold the laws of the United States, the U.S. Constitution, And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit how the Constitution at the federal level affects you all the way down here at the JP level.
Well, and if I'm elected, I'm going to be taking the oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Texas Constitution. I've already taken this oath twice, when I was licensed as an attorney, and then again as an legal officer. Those are lifelong commitments, but I'll be very happy to take the oath again. And of course, the work of the Justice Peace implicates the Constitution. I'm sure realize that. The Fifth Amendment, the right to due process, the right against self-incrimination, the Sixth Amendment rights relating to trial and confrontation of witnesses, the Eighth Amendment right against excessive bail. So really, the work of the Justice of Peace, probably on a day-to-day basis, is going to implicate the Constitution. And I've just decided really I have three broad responsibilities. The first one is to uphold my oath of office, and it's done in you take the oath in a ceremony, but this is not just a ceremonial matter. This is a legal commitment, and we should treat it that way. Secondly, I think that the duty of the judge is to do justice. When you hear a case, you're going to act, apply the law uniformly, fairly, without bias or prejudice. And then I think the third responsibility in this office is really to manage the office in the most cost-effective manner possible. I believe I would have a fiduciary obligation to the taxpayers in the county to do that. The budget of the office, I believe, is around under $2 million. I'm not sure how many personnel are employed, but I believe it's probably comparable to what my law firm was when I last practiced on a full-time basis. And so I have the executive experience of managing the office at times, whereas my opponent does not. And I think that it's one thing to make promises to voters about what you're going to do as far as changing procedures and policies, but I think until you actually take office and familiarize yourself with various factors, such as what the budget is, what you have to work with, who the personnel are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, changes in the law potentially. We have legislatures going to meet, and that's next January. Those things affect the performance of the office, and I believe in the concept of continuous improvement. And from day one, I'm going to begin to make an assessment of the practice and procedures and make certain that they're the most cost-effective possible.
So you won't be the type of judge that looks at someone who pleads the fifth and says, "That means you're guilty."
Infamous.
I don't know if we have any announcements before Rick gets here.
I wanted to spend 25 seconds, and Michael was there on Saturday night. We just really had a great time out at the Texas Disposal Systems Exotic Wildlife Ranch. That was our second year in a row.
See that back there?
Well, that's fine. That's fine. We like these black robes in honor of the judicial candidate. But anyway, we had a good time, and that's really what that was about. It's not a big gala with everyone wearing tiaras and diamonds and sequins. It's just a picnic with some barbecue and great evening.
I wore my bolo tie out there, so it's down on as you can get. It was fun.
We had more than 400 people.
You had wild animals out there?
Oh, yeah.
Giraffes.
It's a big landfill. Y'all know about there all the time. You've got 1 minute left. Yeah, this is a nice place. I used to haul loads out there, and they do some really good recycling work too. In my old outlaw dump truck days.
You're going to make your announcements.
Oh, yeah, we got no show next week, but we'll be back week after that. I appreciate all y'all coming on, especially you, Mike, and I can't be here.
Yeah. And I just remind everyone, we've got 8 weeks from today for early voting starts on October 22nd.
We'll be pushing on. Oh, we're gone. No, we got 30 seconds. We got 30 seconds.
We'll do
Come
some
on out here.
kind of event for early voting, and we'll try to get everybody to come out and have a rally, have you speak, and then have everybody go out and vote.
You got plans coming up.
Awesome.
Yeah, here's part of our crew, Cole. Anything you want to, oh, we got 10 seconds left. No, we got 5. I know, that's 5 seconds. Anyway, folks, we'll be back. Bye.
PQ Center for all. But we need your help. Join us in helping make this vision.